What if I told you that this race between Doc Hudson and Leroy Heming could have never happened? Today we're going to be talking about that, so let's get right into it. Cars is turning 20 years old this year, so to celebrate, we decided to make a video dedicated to one of the classic characters from the first film, Doc Hudson. When Pixar released Cars 3, one of the most emotional parts of the movie was the return of Doc Hudson. After all, Doc had been absent from Cars 2 because Pixar chose not to recast the character following the death of his voice actor, Paul Newman. So hearing Doc's voice again through archived recordings and seeing new flashbacks of his racing career felt really special, and honestly, I still think those scenes are some of the best moments in the whole movie. But there's one problem. Cars 3 accidentally contradicts several major details established in the original Cars. And the strange thing is, those contradictions actually affect some of the most emotional parts of Doc Hudson's story. In the original Cars movie, Doc tells Lightning exactly what happened to him.
They quit on me. When I finally got put together, I went back expecting a big welcome. You know what they said? Your history. Moved right on to the next bookie standing in line. There was a lot left in me. I never got a chance to show 'em.
Those lines, along with some of the other context of the movie, help to establish important details. First, Doc Hudson crashed in 1954. Lightning McQueen said so, and it's also on the newspaper. This also tells us that he never raced in the Piston Cup again after his crash on June 20th, 1954. And finally, there was apparently something he never got a chance to show the racing world. The original Cars even gives us a surprisingly detailed newspaper article describing the crash itself, and this is where things start getting really interesting because the version of the crash shown in Cars 3 is very different from what this article describes. Unfortunately, the newspaper article is a little fuzzy to read in the film, even on the 4K version. That being said, I was able to decode it just by looking at it and doing a lot of research and trying to take an educated guess at what it would say, and I think I've mostly decoded it. Feel free to correct me in the comment section below. This is what the article says. Extra, we never muffle the truth. The Daily Exhaust, final, 92nd year, number 240, June 21st, 1954, 10 cents, Hornet 1-1234. Crash, Hudson Hornet out for season. Hudson Hornet does a cartwheel into the infield after hitting the outside wall. Champ was hurt badly in crash. Season ender fender bender puts young Hornet in garage. By rack and pinion. Trackside Daytona. In a spectacular crash midway through the Piston Cup Series race at Daytona yesterday, the crowd favorite took a tumble that some say may end his career. I'll be back on the track as soon as I get some of these dents knocked out of my frame, said the feisty young Hudson Hornet, who has dominated the Piston Cup circuit for the last 3 years. But others, speaking off the record, the trouble began on the backstretch when Stu deBaker, otherwise known as the Troublemaker, blew a tire and started a sideways skid towards the infield. Swerving to avoid Stu, Hud connected with one of the Dodge boys, swung out his tail, and began to roll and tumble, first hitting the outside wall, and then cartwheeling across the track into the infield, where he landed right side up, but with clear signs of injury to his frame and bodywork. The very bruised and battered Hudson was unconscious when he was craned onto a flatbed ambulance and taken to the emergency garage. In a spectacular crash midway through the Piston Cup Series race in Daytona yesterday, the crowd favorite took a tumble that some say may end his career. Hudson Hornet said, "He's not quite as fast as he was. There's a lot of the newest models coming along that are certain to beat him on the straightaway at last. Hudson Hornet in better days." That's a very specific sequence of events, and there's another interesting detail hidden in this article. It specifically names two parties involved in the crash, Stu deBaker and the Dodge boys. Stu deBaker is obviously a parody of the real car brand Studebaker, and interestingly enough, a green Studebaker named Sammy the Studebaker later appears in a Cars comic as one of Doc Hudson's rivals. That probably wasn't a coincidence. Sammy even carries the number 23, matching one of the real Studebakers that raced in NASCAR during the early 1950s. The article also mentions the Dodge Boys, implying there were multiple Dodge racers involved in the wreck. What's fascinating is that Cars 3 doesn't simply ignore the original newspaper article, it actually rewrites it. The version shown in Cars 3 removes deBaker, the Dodge Boys, and the mention of Doc striking the outside wall, which makes sense because none of those things happen in the Cars 3 flashback. The crash itself is completely different. In the original newspaper account, the accident begins in traffic after another racer blows a tire on the backstretch. But in Cars 3, Doc loses control by himself while leading on the straightaway. It's an entirely different crash. Now let's talk about the biggest continuity issue in Cars 3. In the flashback sequence, Doc races against a rookie named Leroy Heming, who is clearly designed as a 1955 Chrysler 300. There's just one problem. The Chrysler 300 debuted on February 10, 1955, but according to the newspaper in Cars, Doc's crash happened on June 20, 1954, roughly 8 months earlier. And Doc himself says he never raced again after the accident. So unless time travel exists in the Cars universe, Leroy Heming literally could not have raced against Doc in that event.
Mater, there's no such thing as time travel.
What makes this especially surprising is that Pixar is usually known for paying attention to tiny details.
There's nothing worse for a car person than watching a movie and seeing something totally out of context. You're watching, say, like a period 50s movie and a 70s Volkswagen Beetle goes by. That's the most annoying thing in the world to a car person. It doesn't matter what it is. If we do something in our movies, we make sure that it's correct, that it's right, and it's something that'll stand up. And that's something that John was very conscious about as a person who grew up in car culture. He didn't want to use the wrong color.
Doc's color's not accurate. We should get, there is a 1951 stock color that's a darker blue.
And a nutty amount of detail that gets missed in, I would probably say, 75% of movies with old cars. There's always something that they get wrong, and I always spot it because I look at that stuff. And as far as I know, we did a pretty good job of covering the bases on this movie.
I love cars, I love racing, I love all that. And so I got really geeky with the detail and trying to get it all authentic.
Don't get me wrong, Cars has a wonderful story with many lovable characters. But I think one of the things that brings a lot of the fans back time and time again to keep watching the movies over the years is all the little details that you can notice. I've watched this movie probably hundreds if not thousands of times, and it seems like almost every time I notice something new. And it's really great when you notice new details that make sense. So it's a little disappointing when in Cars 3 there are some things that don't seem like they quite add up to Cars 1. There's also a smaller visual inconsistency. I bet you never noticed this before, but in the original Cars, Doc's Fabulous Hudson Hornet livery actually has two variations. The one we are most familiar with is the one we got as a diecast, which is the regular Hudson Hornet, as he appears when he becomes Lightning McQueen's crew chief and in the epilogue of the film. But there's actually another version of the Hudson Hornet, which is shown in all of the newspapers from when Doc was a racer in the Piston Cup. And this version of the Hudson Hornet paint scheme has the number 51 placed toward both the front and rear sections of the sides. But in Cars 3, the front number disappears entirely, leaving only the rear placement.
Hey, Doc! Come look at this fellow on the radio. He looks just like you.
Pixar probably just forgot that there were two different versions, so they used the one we were already familiar with. It's a small detail, but again, this is Pixar, a studio famous for getting details exactly right. Speaking of right, another potential contradiction is a little more speculative than definite, but hear me out. In Cars, Doc tells Lightning McQueen that there was a lot left in him. He never got a chance to show them. That line always seemed connected to Doc's signature move, turning right to go left. That's why the ending of the original Cars is so powerful. Lightning finally performs Doc's move in front of a massive crowd while Doc watches proudly from the pit stand. It feels like Lightning accomplished what Doc never got the chance to do himself, something that he spent years practicing on Willie's Butte and finally perfected. But Cars 3 changes that. In the 1954 flashback, Doc is clearly shown using the right-to-go-left maneuver successfully during the race itself, as if he did that in every race he had been in. Which raises the question, if Doc already demonstrated the move publicly during his racing career, then what was he referring to when he said he never got a chance to show them in the first film? Don't forget that Doc won 3 Piston Cups 3 years in a row and had the most wins in a single season in 1952. And this is in the early days of the Piston Cup, so that would be a significant amount of the wins in the early days of the sport. I don't see how in his mind he would feel that there would be anything left to prove. But also remember that in real life, the Hudson Hornets dominated NASCAR in those days, and that was because of their speed and the way they were built. They had a step-down design which was different from other cars of the time period, so it made sense that the Hudson Hornet dominated the track. When Doc Hudson was a racer in the Piston Cup, he didn't need any fancy maneuvers because he already had the speed advantage. What makes all of this even more unfortunate is that Cars 3 clearly wanted to explore Doc Hudson's legacy more deeply. During production, there were rumors that the film originally included a scene explaining how Doc Hudson passed away. That sequence never made it into the final movie. And we also never got to see more of what happened after Doc's crash, how he was rejected by the racing world or how he lost his career. And interestingly enough, Cars 3 actually could have included Leroy Heming without contradicting the original movie at all. The simplest solution would have been making Leroy the rookie Doc was always referring to in Cars. Not a competitor in Doc's final 1954 race, but the replacement who took Doc's spot in 1955 after the crash. That would have perfectly matched Doc's line, moved right on to the next rookie standing in line. In that version, Leroy Heming wouldn't contradict the timeline, he would actually reinforce Doc's tragedy. Now to be clear, none of this ruins Cars 3. I still appreciate that Pixar brought Doc Hudson back in such a respectful way, especially using archived recordings of Paul Newman rather than recasting the character. And thematically, the movie's focus on mentorship fits perfectly with Doc's relationship with Lightning McQueen. But it is disappointing that the film contradicts so many important details from the original Cars, especially when those details were part of what made Doc's story so emotional in the first place. In the original film, Doc Hudson's tragedy wasn't just that he crashed, it was that the racing world moved on before he could prove he still had greatness left in him. And ironically, Cars 3 may have rewritten part of the very story that made Doc so memorable to begin with. But maybe the most interesting part of Doc Hudson's story is something we still don't fully understand, because in the original Cars, Doc never actually says who gave up on him. He just said, "They quit on me." They moved right on to the next rookie standing in line. So who exactly was he referring to when he said they? Was it the fans, the sponsors, his racing team, the Piston Cup itself? Maybe that's a mystery worth exploring another time. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please tell me in the comment section below what you think. Which version of Doc Hudson's backstory do you prefer? For me, I'm going to stick with the original movie because it's the original. I just don't like it when sequels contradict what was already established in the first movie, and with Cars 1 being such a detailed film, going through the effort of writing up a whole newspaper article for Doc's crash, I don't really appreciate that Doc's crash was altered in Cars 3 when they very easily could have just incorporated what was listed in the newspaper in the third movie. Again, thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to Collection TV for more videos like this. Just wanted to try something a little different. Please let me know what you thought of it, and maybe we'll do more of these. We'll see you guys next time.